Good morning. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Whitus,
Here.
Fenton, Buckley, Pinkley,
Here.
Yancey,
Here.
Romine,
Here.
Denham, Milton,
Here.
Dobbins.
Here.
Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We will start off with our first agenda item, and that is the approval of the Finance Committee minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Next agenda item is we'll get a staff report from Jamie.
Thank you, Mayor. We're going to talk about the sales and tourism tax report today, and this will be as of the end of period 12, so which means the December receipts, which are October sales. One thing I do want to remind you all, especially for those of you who haven't sat on the Finance Committee before during year end, it takes us a little bit longer to go through the year end. We do have period 12 before you, but what we call a period 13 is all of our accruals because we are a modified accrual basis. So essentially all that means is our January and February tax receipts what is actually your November and your December sales. So what we have to do is we have to accrue those back into the proper year in which they occurred, which means the January and February for 21 that you see the receipts were actually November and December of 2020s. So it's accounting just to make sure that we have accounted for all of the sales in the proper year. So you'll see period 12, and we typically have several accruals, mostly pertaining to revenue and taxes, and we also go through that with expenditures as well. So next committee, what you'll do, you'll see period 1, and we will present the final year end, obviously like we do every year, once it's been thoroughly audited. And just as a reminder, we do have extra audit this year due to the federal grant money that we have received, okay? I just wanted to state that so you're thinking, why are we just now receiving December's? That's why.
Jamie, excuse me, just for clarification. So am I hearing you right that on this report, I know when we show a December number here, it's for November, December, excuse me, October, November numbers. And then for January, what this chart will show us is the January of 2021. As we get the 2022 number, does that replace, does that go back and then change this?
Not on this report. You'll see it in other reports, like a period 13 financial. You'll see that accounted for. On this report, it's just cash receipts. So it's just when we keep the cash receipts. We do that so as not to confuse the modified accrual and the receipt basis.
Okay.
Does
So
that make
this
sense?
doesn't change,
It will not change,
but our
no.
financial statements will change.
They will because of
Okay.
the accruals of the 2 months we have to do, yeah.
You know, Alderman Fenton has graced us with his presence. Hi. Sorry, go ahead, Jamie.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as of December, we are at 13.8 million in sales tax, which is a 37.9% increase over the previous year. As 2020 was an anomaly, we hope. I did also do a comparison to 2019. It's still 2021's tax receipts. We're still 17.6% greater than 2019. You look across all of the 10 years that are presented before you today, the amount of receipts that we have received as of period 12 are much greater than any year in the past for the 10 years. But we also have to look at the other side of the inflation rates, the expense, the cost, the increasing costs, and all of those things. So while the receipts are greater, and again, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, they are greater. We did have a good cash receipt year. I mean, we did bring in more money. Just keep in mind, inflation and the rates and the increasing costs and all of those will have an effect and weigh in on that pool of funds. The next one is your transportation. This is your half cent, and it was 6.8 or 38.3%, and it pretty much mirrors year over year for the sales tax because it is a half cent sales. So you can use the same logic that you do on the sales tax with the transportation tax and the public safety tax because they are sales tax. So again, we present 10 years so that you can see what we do. We keep the graphs, we do monitor, we do benchmarks, those kind of things. So I just wanted you to see the transportation sales tax as well. Cash receipts for sure across the board were much greater than what we have seen in the past. But there's also another piece to that story that I just wanted you to keep in the back of your mind, okay? If you want to keep moving. This is your public safety sales tax, and 6.8 million as well at 38.4%. And you can see that goes back to the beginning of when we implemented the public safety sales tax. Okay, we can keep moving. This is your tourism tax, and you will see November's receipts, which are still October sales. Tourism is only 1 month lag because we handle that in-house. And so you can see that at November, which is October sales, it's 15.1 million, 95.5% greater than our 2020 year. Again, an anomaly, but you can extrapolate that and you can look all the way across the 10 years and see it's actually 32% greater than 2019. Okay. Okay. And then here's the breakdown of the tourism tax, 95.5% increase, and then it breaks it down by category for you so that you can see. Again, we're keeping for this year. I don't think you'll see 2 years moving past unless you want to. We can keep that up. But for the 2021 year, we kept the 2019 and 2020 differences out there for you because of the anomaly of 2020. I mean, it was a good request that we had to show that. So you can see the breakdown there, and you can see it by amusement, theaters, etc. Okay? The next one is our rolling 12. These are the tax receipts generated by the area. The first report is, and this one shows you month over month. Remember on these reports, when we get the taxes in, when we get them in from the state for these reports, we go back and we put those taxes in the month that they should have been in the month they generated. Because as you can imagine, there's a lot of late payments, there's a lot of payment plans, those kind of things, that we have to go back in and put them back into the month that they were generated. So this one is month. Excuse me. The next one you'll see is yearly, and this one shows the actual growth. If our fiscal year ended in September, so it was October through September fiscal year, can you scroll up a little bit, Tracy, on that? I'm sorry, down. Sorry about that. You would see we had a 34% growth overall in the city in comparison. Okay, so this really shows you by category the growth based on what we receive and how we look at extrapolating that through these two reports. Okay? The next one is the restricted. This is a restricted report, and we have this simply so that you can see outside of the TIF districts how well the rest of the city is doing, or the comparisons for the rest of the city. So if you look at this report and you can say this is your 1% sales tax outside of the TIFs that are involved with this tax, what are we doing and how are we doing? 2021 was an increase of 3.1 million over the previous year. Obviously, that was 2020 anomaly. Again, I'll keep stating that. And then you can see over the last 10 years how we landed here. That's strictly so that you can say, okay, outside of the TIF districts, the rest of the city is doing pretty well. It's holding its own. It's keeping up, and it's even having a growth. You can look at it that way. And the next one will be the same report.
Excuse me, Jamie.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. The bottom where it says the note, it says the April amounts do not include the aquarium or the boardwalk. Boardwalk is Branson Landing?
No, the boardwalk is the new TIF for the aquarium, and that is because of when it began,
Okay, so these do not include those, so,
just in that month, and then it
but
did.
but it did include Branson Landing, Branson
Did.
Hills? Yeah, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So the grayed out months is just simply because it wasn't activated yet, is the proper word, I guess, so. Okay. And then here is the tourism, again, same idea for this report, just so that you can judge the tourism tax and how well it's doing in the rest of the city outside of the TIFs, okay? Is there any questions on those reports? Okay, we'll keep moving then. Okay, this is that monthly budget report that we've prepared based on your 1%. You'll see it again in the tourism tax. This is strictly because we are a highly tourism-generated city, so you can't just look at the budget, do a straight line across 12 periods and assume that month over month, this is how we're doing. And so just background, I think I've told y'all this many times, but I'm gonna tell it to you again because it's important to note that we do an average over 5 years. And what we do is that shows us the trends over the year. So it'll show July may be a higher generating month than August. That's kind of the idea behind it. And so we've got those trends, and we also put a percentage to that on the overall budget that was approved. So you can see on this report, the overall budget that was approved for 2021 that we did for revenue basis was 9.5 million. And remember the discussions back when we did that, it was, are we going to just use 2020's revenue and just bring it up a little bit? Are we gonna stair step it back, knowing the economy back to where we should be? And we said we were gonna stair step it back to try to get back up to what we call normal revenue generation. So we did 9.5 million for 2021 revenue. That's what we assumed in the budget. As you can see, we have exceeded that 9.5 million by 45%. So we actually brought in, based on period 12 numbers, 13.8 million. Okay, that's really what that's for. And to be able to look month over month, how did we do in this month compared to all of the rest of those months over the last 5 years? That's what that is for, so that you can gauge the business going on in the community and the operations of our community. So the next one is the same thing. It's for tourism, and we assumed tourism was a little bit more difficult when we did the budget because of the nature of what we were dealing with. So 7.3 million is what we assumed revenue income would be for 2021, and we actually, as of period 12, as of period 11 on tourism, got 15.1 million, and we are about 133% over what we assumed. Okay. The next one is the financials. We'll go through the income statement. Okay, the first one is the general fund. And so this is as of period 12. Their total revenues are 24 million, just a little over 24 million, versus 2020 was 20.5 million and 22 million in 2019. So you can see we've had quite a growth in revenue, but you can go also down and look at the revenue sections and compare them year over year and take a look at that. The expenditures at 8.5 million versus 7.6 and 7.9. A few things that I want to point out here, finance. We get a lot of comments on the finance line because we are finance, okay? So it's 104% over budget. This is dealing with there is what we call a contra against our payroll for an administrative fee because of one of those TIFs, so it would offset our payroll. That TIF did not operate to the level that we had assumed, so we're over budget in that area. Going forward, we're going to address that. We're going to take a look at putting more of the administrative fees in the finance to offset that, meaning what we do is like tourism tax. We get about a 2% admin fee because we, in our department, process all that tourism tax. And so that's for the administration of that tax. We're going to start showing you really what it costs truly the city to run the finance department, because there's a lot of fees that we generate just by mainly administering the TIFs and the other taxes. So we're going to start showing you that so we don't run into this issue again. Going down through that, I think that was really the only one that I wanted to point out to you. Is there any other questions regarding so far the general fund? And we'll move down to the other financing sources. Again, the other financing sources are transfers. You can see the American Rescue Plan. That was the payments the money that we got in and we used to pay out the staff for the 5 and 10%, if you all recall that. Again, you've got your debt services on here. We have to bring that money in through the general fund and transfer them out to our TIF funds. The subsidies for the parks, all of those are wrapped up in the other financing sources. So you can see the total there was 9.7 million versus last year was 9.4 and 11.7 the previous year. For an unreserved fund balance as of the end of period 12 of 12.1 million in the general fund. And we'll keep going. I know that we have quite a bit and looking to get through, so I'll try to pick it up a little bit. Public Safety Fund, you have 8.2 million versus 5.4 and 6.1 the previous year. I will point out that 1.2 million, this is a summary of both police and fire, their funds. That 1.2 million is the fire truck. So that loan that we did for the fire truck, it's actually a prepaid amount. So the revenue that came in was 1.2 million. We have to account for it through revenue. But you will see the expense side of it on your balance sheet under your prepaids, okay? Because we cannot recognize that revenue until we actually have that fire truck, which may take 12 months from now, okay? Total expenditures are 10.5 versus 10.5 last year and 11.4 the previous year. You want to scroll down to other financing sources. You got 5.8 million versus 5.9 in 2020 and 7.5 in 2019. You can see the internal service funds transfers. Those are just based on budget. The transfer in from the general fund is out there, and the American Rescue Plan, those are the ones that I wanted to highlight. Those are for the expenses for the 10% that they were given, for a total unreserved fund balance of 9.5 million. That's the summary. If you want to look at the breakdowns, both police and fire, we can do that as well. For police, and I think this is the last month. Next month, you'll start to see some history behind these individual reports. So you've got 3.8 million revenue, and this is, again, the breakdown. If you want to scroll down, and then you can see their expenditures are 5.9 million, and then the other financing sources, we just discussed what those were. So 3.4 million for a total fund balance of 4.5 million, and that is for police. Okay, and then the next one is fire, and you can combine those two and you'll get the summary. So you got 4.3 million, there's your 1.2. That's accounted for through the fire because that is a fire truck. 4.5 million for expenditures, and if you want to scroll down to the other financing sources, 2.3. And you can see their transfer in, the split, the 55 and 45%, and you can see that accounted for as well, for a total unreserved fund balance of 4.9 million.
Jamie, would you just overview? The fire was 2.6 million above budget, and police, I believe, was 2-point-something million. Could you just generally explain, that's whatever it is, $4.5 million. Where is that $5 million going? Is it going into, it'll just stay in reserve?
Let me just make sure I understand what you're asking. Are you talking about the fund balance, the difference between the budget column and?
Yes.
Okay, I follow you, yes. Anything that we accounted for, if you want to scroll to show the fund balance, nope, yeah. Keep going. Thank you. So right there, the unreserved fund balance, if you see that 2.3 versus the 4.9, I think that's what you're asking me. So yes, anything that was budgeted that wasn't used will just fall back down into the reserve, or it won't be withdrawn from the reserve, I should say. So this budget number assumes all of those budgeted items happened, then that was what their reserve would be left with. But since they didn't and we came in better than what we thought, their reserve is now 4.9 million. So it all ends up, revenues minus expenditures, it all ends up back in the reserve.
So from your department, do we have a plan or what we would like to see done with that 5 million? I mean, 4.9, are we just going to keep it in reserve or is it going to apply towards well, we almost funded the fire department now, right?
Yes, so that is what, the reserve is your one-time monies versus your ongoing, and we've
Sure.
talked about that a little bit, but yes, the good question in there is, for this purpose right now, for period 13, you'll see 1.5 million of that because that is your fire fund.
Yes.
Come out and go into the internal service fund to pay cash for that fire station. So we already did 1.5, this one will be 1.5, and the next one will be, next year will be 500,000.
Right, yeah.
For a total of 3.5. But yes, that's what it's for your one-time monies that we need, or your capital items, those kind of things. And natural, hate to use disasters, so we'll say occurrences that happen throughout the year, floods, all of those kind of things that can have an impact to your bottom line, and that's what that reserve is used for. So yes, sir.
Any of those, is it permissible for this fund to apply towards salaries?
Not for the reserve, I would not recommend that because that, that's an ongoing expense.
Right.
And so what we have to do is we have to be able to balance your ongoing. And if we can't balance the ongoing, then we need to look at other ways, either generating revenue or reducing our expenditures to maintain that balance of your ongoing so that you can use your unreserved fund balance for the purpose that that fund balance was set there for, whether it is your natural occurrences, your one-time monies, capital, those kind of things that are in the budget and approved through that budget.
I would assume, when we look at the percentage we want to keep in the reserve funds, this will just, I don't want to say dramatically, because I'm not sure what that total number is, but it'll significantly increase that percentage of reserve.
That is true.
Yep.
It will. Yes, you'll see that in the comprehensive annual financial report. It will increase that because of the cash receipts.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The next one is your convention center. So your total revenues of 3.9 million versus last year at 1.9, and the year before it's 5 million, a little more than that. Your expenditures are at 4.2 million, 3.4 in 2020, and 5.3 in 2019. You can see the transfer ends. That was the 316,000, and then your tourism marketing money at 406,000 for an ending result of 578,000 reserve.
Excuse me, Jamie, do you know
Yes.
when we'll get our report from the convention center?
That's a good question. I know it's quarterly, March. Sorry, I had to think about what month this is. Yes, probably the very next, which is March 24th.
Because based on these numbers, I would anticipate the amount we set aside to offset the expenses,
The subsidy?
the subsidy.
I gotcha.
Would, and I don't know if the word significant is appropriate, but there'll be a significant difference of how much we've set aside based on their results and how much is actually needed, is what I'm looking forward to.
We watch that very closely because the subsidy affects us, right? It affects
Sure.
our general fund. And so we work with, on a monthly basis, that convention center to really monitor that. There have been times, I will tell you, that the first of the year, mainly because their operations aren't really running until probably May, a really good start. So we have to send more to them, and then at the end of the year, based on operations, we get that back so that it doesn't affect our budget. But in the end, if they needed more to go over the budget, it would come here first for approval. And then you would see a budget amendment through the Board of Aldermen as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that report, because like you said, it'll affect our general fund.
It does, and we don't want that happening. We even work closely with them in the budget. So if budget time, they send us this astronomical number, we're like, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next one is your tourism fund. Total revenues are at 17.1 million versus 8.8 in 2020 and 13.1 in 2019. And your expenditures are at 13 million versus 6.4 in 2020 and 8.6 in 2019. And you'll look at the debt service, the principal. That is the COPs that we paid off, the $7 million. And then the 2010B bond we also paid, that's accounted for in the debt service principal dollars. So you can see that there. And scroll down and you'll see the unreserved fund balance is at 16.8 million in the tourism after all of those are accounted for.
Jamie,
Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
And this maybe relates to this and back to the police and fire funds as well. And I know 1 year, you can't really establish a trend off of 1 year, certainly. But let's say 2021 turns out to not be an anomaly. And maybe going forward, the numbers we saw in 2021, which are all significantly more than previous years, if over the next year or two that does become a trend and we see those numbers being consistently met, I think to the mayor's question, I asked this question a couple months back as well. I mean, would there not be, as opposed to being more conservative in our budget, would there not be an opportunity, and it may not be this year or maybe even next year, but once that trend is established, assuming for a second it is, would there not be an opportunity to increase that budget at that point to allow for those ongoing expenses to increase based on what we're seeing as trends versus having these large chunks of money dropped into the reserve balance that can only be used for one-time expenditures? And again, I understand we can't base that off 1 year, but if we said, okay, well, 2022 is pretty consistent with 21, maybe 23 ends up being consistent. Is there not an opportunity there to say, well, hey, maybe it's not a revenue side issue. Maybe we could be a little more aggressive with our budget, increase what we're budgeting so we can account for higher ongoing expenditures without it going into the reserve balance that can only be used for these one-time capital time expenses. And I think our type expenses, and I think that kind of goes back to when we had the discussion about pay increases and things like that a couple months back. And I think the mayor and I both kind of agree that I respect. I've said this time and time again. I respect so much that you are conservative and that you are very cautious with how we use that money. But if we saw this continue to be a trend and we see these, I understand 2022 we may not see that 30% increase, but if it's consistent with what we saw in 2021 as compared to previous years, that's still a pretty good increase. And so I guess my ultimate question is there an opportunity, instead of dumping big chunks of money at the end of the year into the reserve balance, is there an opportunity to look at and say, well, hey, let's maybe be a little less conservative with our budget so we can increase some ongoing expenditures and kind of ease that side of it? Does that make sense at all?
Yes, and I was just kind of waiting until you finished your question, but the answer is, no, the answer is we look at that during the budget time. So the overall answer is absolutely there is. Again, it based on history, economic forecast. During the budget time, we give you a sheet and it's an economic forecast of which we compare to many of the different economic websites or research modules that we look at while we're performing our budget. So we don't just look at the revenue and just increase it by a 1% or whatever unless we think it's needed. So we look at that, all of those economic forecast sites to say, what are they telling us that the next year's going to look at like? And how does Branson compare over a last 3-year history to what we're doing and trending in the world? So your question was a good question because I understand that 2021 was a boost in cash receipts And I get that we were very conservative in how we budgeted because it was an unknown. But the more history we get, the more research we do, we will budget properly for the tax revenues. And what you'll see then is if we have a good 3-year history of these taxes staying up, and so like 2022's end of the year, we didn't decrease from the previous year, that's a good benchmark to say, okay, are we looking at this properly? And then you'll see it in the next year's budget. We will raise the expectations for the tax revenue. Therefore, we can raise the ongoing expenditures as they need to be and still keep those ongoing pieces balanced. Sure. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, and I apologize for not remembering this from last year's budget process, but when you're sitting down to begin that process, are you also looking at what's happening in the current year? In other words, as we get to budget this year, will you be factoring in, or will we be factoring in, okay, we know what 2021 is because that's on the reports, but will we also be looking at 2022 as we go through that to say, hey, up to this point, 2022 is trending the same as 21? So in other words, are we going to wait till the end of 22 to look at it, or are we looking at it as we're going through that
It's a
year?
good question, and yes, we do. Right up until even this past year, we even increased the taxes right before we brought it to the Finance Committee.
I thought we did, yeah.
Because of the trends in how we were doing. And so, yes, we try to look at that year, knowing that the Christmas season, you could go both ways there, knowing that we felt like the first part of the year was good enough that we could do that. And yes, so we try to look at all of that, the current year, past years, and the trends going on in the world. Springfield, MSU has a site that we review. We've even called the university before, and they have an economic research professor up there that will talk to different cities and help them. So we try to do all of that to be able to maintain our operations. So yes, sir, we do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The next one is your transportation sales tax fund. You look at 7.8 million for revenue versus 5.3 versus 6.7 in 2019. And go to your expenditures at 3.4 million versus 2.5 in 2020 and 3.7 in 2019. If you want to scroll down to your other financing sources, again, a majority of those are debt, and you can see the American Rescue Plan amount of money that accounted for the 5% increase there. So you have 2.5 million in other financing sources in 2021 versus 2.2 in 2020 and 2.5 in 2019 for the ending fund balance of 5.3 million. Again, remember accruals. This is as of period 12, so this will change a bit due to accruals, okay? The next one is your debt funds. This accounts for all your TIF debts, your Branson Landing, your Branson Hills, both sides. And so this is your debt structure. You can see at 14.7 million in revenues versus 12 million 2020 and 12.6 million in 2019. And then again, you have your 16.4 million in expenditures versus 22.4 million in 2020 and 15.4 in 2019. And I will say those are just based on the debt, principal of the debt, and you know that we've had some mandatory redemptions and such for those. We just took those budget amendments before the board just recently. Okay, and so you've got other financing sources here, 4.2 million versus 2.5, and 4 million in 2019 for an ending fund balance reserve of 16.6 million.
Jamie?
Yes, sir.
Would you take a moment, when I was running some of the numbers, when we look at these, and I know we talk about before TIFs and after TIFs, Branson Landing had an exceptional year in '21. I believe the increase in the TIF money, which means the city's collected it, but it goes back through to Branson Landing, was $800,000. I mean, a significant number. So as we're looking at these numbers, when we talk, I just wanted to bring up the importance of when we look at the numbers, and then we really need to look at these after the TIF, because we could say we brought in this, but and I believe it was 8%. 8% of our increase, I believe, goes back to Branson Landing. 8.8%, I think.
And that's the importance of those reports that we went through. I'm sorry. That's the importance of the reports that we went through, not restricted to TIF, so that you can gauge the overall other businesses outside of the TIF and see how they're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, keep moving, please. This one is your 160 fund. This is also a debt service fund, and if you scroll down, you can see the expenditures. That's just due to one bond issue, so 2.9 million, again, 2.9 million last year, and then 2.9 million the year before. So you've got other financing sources. Those are the monies coming in from the obligated funds based on the bond indentures, and you can see 3.8 million versus 3.4 the year before and 2.6 in 2019 for an ending fund balance of 3.8 million. This is your capital projects funds, and this will show you the capital expense so far for 2021. 1.2 million versus 6.3 and 7, and then that 633,000, that was an accounting function that we had to do based on the capital project and how that performed. So 1.2 million, and then you gauge it by the 777,000. So if you scroll up and look at your other financing sources, you have 1.2 million. And that was the undergrounding. That was your 76 undergrounding. So remember what I said, we had to transfer it out, move it into the capital fund to account for that capital project. So it came in, it went in from the CID. I believe you saw it on the tourism fund, and then it was transferred back out from the tourism into the capital fund so that we can account for it through the capital projects fund. And then we are currently doing that. Okay? And then you have about 808,000 left in your capital projects fund reserve. Those, that money has all been designated to capital projects, whether or not they've been done or they're still in progress, those kind of things. That's what that reserve accounts for. So if we want to keep scrolling, we have the perpetual fund, which is $5,000. You can keep moving. And then the next one is your parks fund. And so on your parks fund, you have 2.2 million in revenues versus 1.5 last year and 1.9 the year before. We generally highlight this fund because look at the campground numbers across the years. So 1.2 million versus 830,000 and even 900,000 in 2019. That's something really good to look at. And then you look at the ball programs and your swim team, those kind of things. They really did well this year. And I just, it's worthy of pointing out because those are services within our city. And so if you look down at your expenditures, not only are the revenues doing well, but their expenditures in comparison are doing very well too. So the overall pictures of the revenues minus the expenditures are well. Look at the net change is 208,000 versus 566 the year before and 572. So if you look at that, you can see the overall picture of how the Parks and Recs department is operating, and I think they're doing a good job.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to give Cindy a shout out
Yes.
for the job her and her department are doing.
Absolutely. And then the other financing sources, the 834, that 750 is the subsidy that comes from the general fund. And then you can see that transfer in from the landscape fund. That's for trees and landscaping, and that's only as they use it, okay? And then so the fund balance is $1.5 million. The next one is the water and sewer fund. You can scroll past, yes, please. Okay. Your revenues are 11.4 million versus 9.4 in 2020 and 9.6 in 2019. You can see that the water revenue, and if you look at the consumption reports that we also posted here for informative purposes, you can see that consumption was up, sewer and water, okay? And then if you scroll down and look at your expenditures, I will point this out too. If you look at the expenditures and compare them back to 2019, they still have done a very good job of managing their expenditures. Their revenues are coming in higher and their expenditures are being managed. And you can see that from the trend of the numbers. So I wanted to point that out as well as, so if we scroll down, you can look at the other financing sources. And you can see the transfer ins are obviously the American Rescue Plan. That's the amount that was accounted for the 5%. And you can see some of the capitalization of the projects. And so ending fund balance reserve is at 65.8 million.
Jamie, I hate to keep interrupting.
That's okay.
That's 65 million. As I recall, that's not cash.
It is not. Correct.
So on future reports, could we have that broken down of how much of that is?
So how much
Capital
you wanted on
improvements?
this report then? How much is cash?
Yeah, because I think anybody looking at that number is going to say, holy moly, you have $65 million. When in fact, we have X in capital and,
Yes, and you can also, to get that information, you can look at the balance sheet as well, and it'll tell you cash versus assets and those kind of things. But if you want me to show it on there, I can drop in a line.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
And the next one, this next one is your capital fund, your large capital, and you can see the sewer connection charges. And then if you scroll down, you can see your expenditures, and those are based on the approved capital projects for the water and sewer program. If you scroll down to see your fund balance, it is at 4.4 million.
Jimmy, would you scroll back up just
Yes.
for a minute?
Yes.
The intergovernmental,
Intergovernmental,
we budgeted $1.3 million, and I don't know what that was. Are we,
The intergovernmental for water sewer are grants, and it is largely the amount of money that we want to get back from the county. So we go after the sewer sales tax accounts. So anytime you see that, that's the amount of money that we will go after and expect. We still have to record some of the accruals and stuff, so you'll see that $0 change, but we're not always going to get that amount of money. That's what we expect to receive. And it also could be a timing manner on when we receive those funds. But intergovernmental would be the amount of grants from the county. It would also be the amount if we go after a FEMA or SEMA project and we feel like we're going to get those, or we have some knowledge as to say we have been approved but just haven't received. Those are that kind of money. That's what goes in that category.
so that's money that the city, our general fund, is anticipating.
Yeah, for the water and sewer, yes. Yeah, so this one it would just go in this fund. This is where we have to account for it, but it's mostly grants that are coming from another governmental entity somewhere in our state.
So when we look at future projects, 1, 2, however many, how long it's going to take to collect that, are we offsetting what our anticipated needs are going to be with this anticipated 1.3 million coming in?
No, not always. We only put those in the budgeted amount if we have reason to believe that we're going to receive them. Most of the time, grants, we don't budget for them if we're in the process or something like that. A large portion of the county money we typically receive if we have gotten approval or those kind of things. So we don't budget grants unless we know that they're coming in some form or fashion. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. You want to scroll up? Okay. And this is your small capital fund, 146. Remember, this is period 12. This doesn't account for a period 13 or audit entries in period 14. So this is period 12. So this is your 146 water sewer. This is your small capital. This amount is paid for out of your operations. The previous capital fund is paid for out of your tourism. Okay. So if you want to scroll up, you can see that they have about a little more than $1 million in that fund in the reserve balance there. Then these are your internal service funds. Remember, we transfer money out of the designated fund, whether it be the general fund, whether it be the tourism fund, whether it be the parks fund, they all have their designated several internal service funds. So we transfer money according to the approved budget out of that fund and into the internal service fund to start. It's basically you save up money for future needs, right? So these are the internal service funds, and these have our accounting for them. Remember, we have a vehicle lease, and so essentially the main funds, whatever those approved vehicles, whatever fund they're in, we account for the entire cost of the vehicle, and then we transfer it out into the internal service fund so that we can properly manage those leases. So you'll see that as well. And then that's what we have, public safety, we have a fire internal service fund, and that's what all of these are generated. You can keep moving. There's your parks. There's not a lot of activity that has been expended out of these funds yet, except for the vehicle lease. But I think Cindy is starting to use hers a little bit, so that's really good. And then you see the transportation, you can see the reserve balance and how much we've got accumulated in that so far. Okay? Is there any more questions yet on those? Okay, so then we'll move on to the other financials. The public safety fund balance on your cash by fund, we posted and we grabbed the wrong one. So Tracy, will you put that other one up there, please? So the one that's out there for the public safety cash by fund is incorrect. And so we will get that corrected online when we're done here, but I wanted to show it to you so that you can see the corrected one. That's not the public safety one, yeah. That's okay. There it is, yeah. Okay, and so these cash by fund reports, actually you can go to the first one. I just want to explain this a little bit. The cash by fund reports, those reports are the comparison or a reconciliation to how much we're reporting to you is in our funds versus how much we have in the bank and investments. And that's how you can tie those reports together. I always tell you ways to check me is that you can look at your income statement and your balance sheet. Those fund balance should agree. And then you can tie the cash by fund back to your balance sheet, the cash on the balance sheet. And you can tie all those three reports together, okay? And that is a good check and balance for you all. So if you,
Excuse me a second, Jim.
Yes.
So when, earlier, we talked about when it showed the 65 million in the water and sewer fund, is this saying that out of that 65 million, 8.7 is cash, and the balance is?
yes, you can go to your balance sheet. Let's just pull the balance sheet up for water sewer, would you please? So your balance, 620, sorry. So on the balance sheet, you'll see what you were just talking about, that 8.7 is your cash. And then all of the rest, you can see the assets, capital assets are 156,000. You can see the accumulated depreciation, the allowance for doubtful accounts, and all of that totals your assets, and then your fund balance, the 65 million, ties back to your assets and minus your liabilities, okay? So that's a good check figure for you to say, okay, there's 65 million in fund balance reserve. What does that make up? I would go back to your balance sheet and say, oh, okay, it's got cash and investments of 8.7, but all the rest are, you see capital assets, and then you have to offset that with accumulated depreciation, and then you've got your liabilities. And so that is a good help for you to identify, okay? That is a good question, thank you. Is there any other questions on any of that so far? I'm trying to leave enough time for y'all to go through the other items. So if there's no other questions, we'll keep moving. The next ones are just your informational reports, your consumption reports, your business license reports, the procurement. We just put that out there for your knowledge. It's not really something that we need to go through. It's just what's going on. Here's what we're doing. Here's an update. Here's new businesses in the city, or those kind of things, just so that you have that informationally in case you want to dive a little bit deeper. And then the next one is your approval of disbursements. Okay, so we do need an approval of this. Is there any questions on that?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
I'd second that.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you. The very next item is your project status report. And that again is a breakdown of the two major projects that we've had in the past, the downtown and the 76. And we've broken that down for you based on history, based on original budget, based on all of those things so that you can see those on a month-to-month basis. So what will happen as that 76 project starts up again, and you can see there's already activity there, and that's for the undergrounding, you'll start to see more and more on this report, and you can track that, okay? So we built that just for your benefit so that you can start seeing that and monitoring that as well. And then the next item is the Project 76 Design Staff Recommendation. And Keith had to leave, and so Cheryl's going to come up, and there is an overview for staff recommendation. And so we work closely with the engineering department and Cheryl and Keith, and I wanted somebody from their department to speak exactly on the staff recommendation. Thank you, dear.
Hi, thank you for having us here today. On the segments 1 and 2 Highway 76 project, we met, we received the qualification statements, we reviewed them as staff. There were about 5 of us in the room, and then we also had the SID board. They also reviewed them, and they had other people that helped them review them. And then we brought that back to you at the last meeting, and we had them do presentations. So we had the 3 presentations from Great River, CPWG, and Bartlett and West. And so after those presentations, even before those presentations, we did reference checks. And those reference checks were checked on every one of those companies, asked the same exact questions to be able to get information from their prior references, whether it was a good project or a bad project. We wanted to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. And our references came back showing Great River as having the best references. So we recommend, our staff recommends, negotiating a contract with Great River. We also had the SID board meeting last week, and the SID board also recommends Great River. So we are recommending Great River Engineering for the project of design of segments 1 and 2 of Highway 76.
Thank you for that. Gail Meyer, President of CID Committee, is in the audience. Gail, would you like to address this before we take action?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Gail Meyer, 365 Whisper Ridge. We did quite a bit of work, and we actually had some folks go look at some things, some projects. As you'll remember, we asked some follow-up questions, and we did get responses from all 3 of the applicants. And really, we had quite a bit of discussion. But we agree, we would recommend the 76 Design Collective, which is led by Great River. And I'm happy to maybe go into the details. I'm not sure it's necessary. There's 2 parts to that, though. One is we believe that the normal model of doing business on a percentage does not help this city. And so we've recommended, and I've had conversation with Stan, that we take a look at that and maybe do a fixed fee and ask throughout this entire project that people provide us time and material sheets. What we've seen in the past is that, and this is a reaction, but what we've seen in the past is these projects have a tendency to grow. And of course, when it's a percentage, then it grows. And we would rather have, especially since costs are so high right now, We would rather have the atmosphere where we're all trying to save dollars instead. So I'm happy to answer questions, but our recommendation is the same.
Thank you very much, Gail. Does the committee have any questions for Gail? Thank you, Gail. So Cheryl, you're asking at this time for this committee to vote on,
We're asking you to recommend for us to negotiate a contract with Great River Engineering for segments 1 and 2 design of Highway 76.
questions from the committee? I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. No further discussion, so we'll take a vote. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you, Cheryl.
I believe the next one is an emergency purchase memo from the Water and Sewer Department. And so basically, these are just mixers, basin mixers for the Compton Drive wastewater treatment plant. And so they received a quote in the amount of $27,000, both units at 13.5, $13,559 per unit. And where's Kendall? If you want more explanation, I'm not really versed in what those mixers are for, but he can come up and tell you what those mixers are for. But it is for an emergency purchase, and it'll have to go budget amendment later.
Kendall, keep your comments clean.
Yeah, anyway, I'll stop there. Again, we actually had 3 mixers last year that failed on us. And all 3 of these mixers was actually purchased at the same time period. So it's kind of interesting that one failed and the next 2 failed after that. These mixers are part of the treatment process. They help us with our phosphorus removal. So the more we keep the fluids mixed together, along with chemicals, it reduces the amount of chemicals we have to use to fight the phosphorus. So it'll help us meet our limits for the state requirements. So again, they went out all about the same time period. We had to end up replacing them so we can maintain our processes, be efficient as possible with our chemicals as well as our electricity. So,
And you've advised us the dramatic increases in the cost of those chemicals.
yes.
Right. Just curious, the useful life of those, how long are they lasting?
Well, for those particular units, they lasted us about, if I remember right, about 12, 13 years.
Okay.
Now, the original equipment, they lasted about 20 years. So the ones that we actually purchased was more in line with the original equipment. They're actually serviceable. We can change the oil on them, maintain them. So we found a good deal on a unit that was sitting on the shelf that would work for us. We got it at a discounted rate as well. So we went ahead and purchased that unit as part of this emergency purchase process, as well as another unit that they had ordered that they did not have on stock. So we're going to try to migrate back to that because of the life cycle. We studied, like I said, the trend of it, and we feel that we can get a better, be more economical by extending those life cycles out and changing oils and maintain. It's a serviceable unit, is what I'm trying to say.
So last year we replaced 3, this is to replace 2. What's our total number of?
Well, a total of 3 last year, period. So this is an emergency purchase that carried over from last year.
Okay.
So.
And I wanted to compliment you when we were going through the financials of how you're running your department.
Our staff has worked very hard at maintaining our expenditures, and part of our being under budget on our expenditures is we've had some staffing shortages as well. So part of those dollars is in that aspect, but we're doing really well, I think. So.
Thank you. So I'm assuming you're looking for a motion, a vote on this, Jamie?
That would be fine. Yes, thank you.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it.
And then is the next one just the director's report? Okay. Okay, so really, the director's, I kind of share with you all throughout the finance committee, so I don't have a whole lot to say. What I will tell you is that we are in the middle of our business license. We kicked that up, started that up and running, and obviously those are due by the end of April 30th or May 1st. So we are working on that within our department. We are also in the middle of working on our audit as well, and I already mentioned we will have a special audit this year for the single audit, and we are also in the middle of working on many grants and trying to maneuver those, function those. We're waiting on applications for the state to put out the application procedure. Last we checked, and I want to say it was a couple of weeks ago, it was in the House, and they were talking about how to handle that at the Jefferson City level. So there is money out there available to us. We have to be smart in the way that we look at the money. Will it, just because it's out there money-wise, is it beneficial to our city to take those dollars? Is there a matching? What is it going to do for our city? But there are many out there that I think will be beneficial to us. So at this point, we're just constantly watching that application process to see when those will be able to apply for those. There are also some at the federal level. Again, those take a little bit more work, lengthier in process. There are certain guidelines that we have to make sure that we have in place prior to even applying for those. Some of the federal grants are a hefty application fee as well. So we have to be thinking about, are we going to be able to get it all done this year in order to be able to justify that application expense, or is it something we should put off to the next year? So all of those things are on our plates right now, and we're moving forward, but I just wanted to keep you up to date as to what is going on. And we will start our 2023 budget process in May. Okay.
Jamie, when will the applications for the business renewal, when will those be sent out?
I believe we've already sent those letters out.
Oh, they have been, okay.
I believe so. So yes, those will be going out, and we've already started processing those as well.
Would you also give us an update on the staffing study? I know before we get to May, this is March, we're going to really rely on that study, I would assume. What's the status of that? Of
Sure.
RFP sent out?
Well, we have to do a budget amendment first before we send out the RFP, because we got to make sure that the money is accounted for before we send out the RFP. So we have to do a budget amendment, and we are currently getting numbers for that budget amendment. I will say that that budget amendment will go before the board at the end of March. And then after that, then we'll send out the RFP for that. We have that drafted, so we'll send that out. So I would say the staffing study, if you're just asking me what I think, I don't think it's going to be done by budget season, just because of the timing of that and the amount of work that goes into when we select a company, the amount of work that that company is going to have to do. But that is my opinion on that. However, I know that we haven't done the budget amendment yet, so that would be the first thing, and then going out to bid is the second step, and then selecting a company, and then having the company do the work. So that is just my timeline in my head of what we have to do.
Thank you. I know that's going to be important, and the time sounds like it's going to take quite a while. Stan, could we possibly put on this coming Board of Aldermen meeting next week this budget amendment, and if we don't know the dollar amounts, maybe we could agree to a not to exceed number?
I don't have a problem at all with it. I know I'm involved in some communication with Jan yesterday regarding the numbers. I haven't spoken with him today about it, but yeah, I don't have a problem with a do not exceed number.
If we put up a do not exceed, put a high number, put a do not exceed.
I mean, it's set like 70,000 or something like that.
And then when
Jamie, is that
well, and then when those RFPs.
Well, as long as we do not exceed, because
But if it does, if the
we have to do our
RFP
research to make sure that do not exceed number is high enough for us not to exceed that.
Okay, but to move forward, maybe it's do not exceed 100,000. If it was 70 and we get the RFPs back and they do exceed that number, then we do another budget amendment.
We would have to. And I guess also what I would say to help speed this up a little bit would be, maybe this would be a time to do a double read.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And so, once I get those numbers from Jan, we can take care of the staff report and stuff like that, if that's what you would like.
That'd be great. Thank you, Stan.
Hey, Jamie, when was the last time a study was done?
The staffing study
Been a
we
while,
did was
isn't
Springstead, and I want to say it was 2016, I want to say it was 2016. We did another one, Evergreen was that, and that was 2010, 2011, and we did one in 2016, and now this one.
What all will be looked at in that audit or that review?
Well, based on what I heard from the HR committee, it'll be a staffing study. It will also be a compensation study. And so I believe that all of those will be wrapped up in a third-party company to come in and look at our staff and look at the compensation. And then they will come before the HR committee and then give their findings and what their recommendations are. Is that
Absolutely.
correct?
And I think part of the importance is, from my point of view, we approved the 2.3 million ARPA money to go towards staff. Following that, we approved the 7%, 4% increase. And I'd feel more comfortable if we had a staffing study for them to give us guidance on what we should be doing, because that 7% and 4% increased our budget by $1 million. And so those are huge numbers, and we're making decisions. I think that this committee and the Board of Aldermen would appreciate to have some real facts as we move forward.
And I just want to be clear, when they review the compensation, they will be doing that. That won't be an internal review, is that correct? And that'll be.
I believe that's what the
and that'll
HR
be
committee want.
like across the board, peer-to-peer.
That's my understanding as well.
Yes.
that
It's
It's an
yeah.
outside source doing it.
Okay.
It'll be an outside source, but I believe a question came up, and I think we're going to provide some guidance of what we feel is comparable.
We're going to tell them who we're losing people to, basically.
Good,
But
okay.
it would be up to them to-
I just think it's good that an outside source that can review what we're doing versus our peers in other communities or whatever, we're looking at it as a level playing field.
It's always good to have a third-party independent company come in so that there's not any bias or anything like that. They come in and then they present their findings, and then y'all do with the findings whatever you want, but yeah.
Right, they're looking at positions, not people in the position.
Correct,
Yeah,
yes,
that's the-
yes. Absolutely, good questions, thank you.
Yeah, great question, Pam, thank you. Is there anything else?
That was the end of my report, thank you for that.
Are there any questions or comments from anybody in the audience? Any questions, comments from the board? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Till next month.